UFC 272 saw Jorge Masvidal take on Colby Covington, and we were treated to anticipation. We were treated to UFC embedded. We were treated to such a press conference. There was fever pitch in this. Bad blood and genuine bad blood of the likes of, heck, maybe John Jones and Daniel Cormier. We hadn't seen this. And this is all leading up to a crescendo of a fight that, we hope would give us an exclamation mark, a reason for our buy-in as an audience. And save for the Jorge Masvidal attempted jump kick a la Ben Askren in the beginning of the fight, I have to say I was left less than enthused in terms of the overall result. Now, as an individual that watches a lot of mixed martial arts, I can appreciate the artistry of wrestling that Colby Covington incorporates and uses, to close the distance. He has, enough striking to make things interesting on the feet, but, lo and behold, wrestling was the modus operandi that he did use to take Jorge down. And he had Jorge down in a lot of times in, compromising positions, no positions where he was, necessarily going to submit Jorge Masvidal, but he dominated. He dominated in all the rounds, and probably the biggest time where we had Jorge potentially in the fight. He did drop a couple of leg kicks that did impede Colby's progress. There was the hook where he had Colby Covington rocked for a very short period of time, and that was probably the most exciting aspect of the fight from an action perspective. Colby recovered. He recovered really quick. And say what you want about Colby Covington, but he does, and this is not new news, so I don't want to hop on about it. He does put a pace that save no one but the champion Kamaru Usman at the moment has been able to solve. And while it may not be the most aesthetically pleasing style to view, you can certainly see it there. It's done effective, and Jorge was not able to manage distance effectively. He was pressed against the cage a lot of the time. And even, I think when Colby was able to get the first takedown, wear on Jorge a bit, even when Jorge was able to, get on top, his punches were labored. His strikes were not as crisp as they normally are. His kicks, I'm not too, I'm kind of lost for words because I'm not too sure what I was expecting. But, probably what occurred was the worst iteration of what an audience probably would have liked to have seen in terms of an action perspective. Again, this is mixed martial arts. Colby did what he had to do. He pushed the pace. He took Jorge to the ground. He rained strikes, he rained elbows, he did what he had to do. George and Jorge, for the most part, wasn't in a lot of compromising positions, but he was beaten. From a scramble perspective, he was beaten. And even at times, and I think this is just the culmination of, the ground and pound, the culmination of, weighing on Jorge, taking the back, getting him in these pseudo neck crank positions. At no point did, Colby really have Jorge's back where he could, enforce a legitimate rear naked choke. But he was there a lot of times, and he was putting his weight. And I think, over the course and period of 5 rounds, it wore on Jorge. And it was a unanimous victory for Colby Covington. Let's just put it at that. Where to next for these guys? For Jorge Masvidal, it's interesting. He signed a new multi-fight deal with the UFC, and there are a lot of fun fights to make for Jorge, but, he's passed to the championship, in my perspective, in my opinion, unless he catches lightning in a bottle again, are all but done, especially in this weight division. Just can't see it personally, especially with the likes of Leon Edwards and Hamzat, and, there's an Edwards fight there if Edwards loses. So Jorge is in this interesting predicament where he's actually, in that Conor McGregor stratosphere in terms of popularity. So he definitely can sell out fights, but it needs to be a very specific one. And if Leon loses against Kamaru Usman, I see that as a perfect fight for Jorge. For Colby Covington, he called out Dustin Poirier, and this is another interesting one. I personally don't want to see Kamaru Usman take on Colby Covington again. I think we've seen that fight. I think we know that while Colby can push the pace, he just doesn't have what it takes to beat the champion. Maybe down the line that happens, but I certainly don't want to see it in the next 3 fights for Kamaru. So where does that lead Colby? I think Colby and Jorge are very interesting use cases in that they've created personas and followings that allow themselves to catapult in contention for UFC pay-per-view fights without any title on the line. And this is a very wrestling sort of model, and only Conor McGregor and the likes of Nate Diaz, from an entertainment perspective, have been able to carry the legs of, being able to sustain a card without having a title on the line. And this is really interesting because when we start branching into 2 separate UFCs where you have, let's call it maybe the purist perspective, where you want to see the best fighters on pay-per-view cards and you want to see a title on the line almost every time, at bare minimum a title eliminator. And then you have these very hard story-driven based narratives a la Conor McGregor, a la Jorge Masvidal, a la Colby Covington. And Colby even blends that even more in that he's still in his prime and he still does, arguably you could say is a top contender in his weight class. So, it's interesting. 2022 is here and we have very interesting permutations in the UFC. Tell me, guys, what do you think? Am I being really harsh on this fight? Was it okay? What did you think? What do you think of Jorge's performance? What do you think of Colby's performance? And what next do you think of these 2 guys? Give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave some comments below, and we hope to see you again soon.